"This is a direct order. Salute me now." That's what the visiting general demanded. But the Royal Guard's response didn't just defy him. It rewrote everything he thought he knew about command and respect. Want to know what really happened? First, hit that subscribe button and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The diplomatic motorcade pulled to a smooth stop at the visitors' entrance to Buckingham Palace, black vehicles gleaming in the crisp autumn sunlight. As the cars settled into position, the door of the second vehicle swung open before the driver could reach it. Brigadier General Marcus Thornton emerged with the brisk efficiency of a man accustomed to moving according to his own timetable rather than others. His uniform was immaculate, every medal and ribbon precisely placed, each crease sharp enough to draw blood, the 4 stars on his epaulettes catching the morning light. 12 minutes behind schedule already, Lieutenant, he muttered to the younger officer, scrambling out of the car after him. Remind me why I agreed to this detour when the defence conference starts in 3 hours? His voice carried the clipped precision of a career military man who demanded efficiency in all things. Lieutenant Davis adjusted his own uniform hastily. The ambassador thought it would be a good diplomatic gesture, sir. The British contingent specifically requested your presence. Diplomatic gestures, Thornton repeated, the words sounding like a mild profanity in his mouth. We could be finalising the Baltic security briefing instead of touring what amounts to an expensive museum. His gaze swept across the palace grounds with the calculating assessment of a tactician rather than the appreciation of a visitor. A group of palace officials approached with welcoming smiles, hands extended in greeting. Thornton straightened his already perfect posture, switching seamlessly into what his staff privately called his diplomatic mode, all firm handshakes and precise courtesy that never quite reached his eyes. "General Thornton, what an honour to welcome you to Buckingham Palace," the lead official began. "The honour is mine," Thornton replied automatically, even as his eyes continued scanning the surroundings. His attention caught on the motionless figure of a royal guard standing at his post, scarlet uniform brilliant against the palace stonework. "I see your famous guards are on duty." "Indeed, General. The Queen's Guard has maintained their post here for centuries." "Maintaining tradition is commendable," Thornton interrupted, already losing interest in the historical lecture. "Though in today's security environment, I've always wondered about the tactical value of predictable positioning and ceremonial attire." The official's smile faltered slightly. "I assure you, General, despite their ceremonial role, each guard is a fully operational combat soldier." "Is that so?" Thornton's tone carried polite skepticism. "Lieutenant," he addressed his aide, without looking away from the guard, "inform the delegation I'll rejoin them shortly. I'd like to observe these combat soldiers more closely." "Sir, the schedule will accommodate a small detour," Thornton finished firmly. "Military assessment is never wasted time, Lieutenant." As the palace officials led the rest of the delegation toward the formal entrance, Thornton set off at a purposeful stride toward the solitary guard. His path cut across the carefully maintained grounds like a ruler's edge, direct and unyielding. Royal Guard. Patrick Winters had noticed the approaching diplomatic motorcade long before it stopped. 8 years of specialized training had honed his peripheral awareness to near supernatural levels. Though his eyes remained fixed forward in the proper 1,000-yard stare, he registered every detail of the American general who had broken away from his group and was now approaching with unmistakable purpose. Just 3 weeks ago, he had been extracting a compromised intelligence asset from a hostile situation in Eastern Europe, an operation still classified at the highest levels. The seamless transition from active field operations to ceremonial duty was part of what made the Queen's Guard unique among military units. The rifles they carried weren't merely props, and the men who stood watch weren't simply trained to stand motionless. Among the gathering crowd of tourists, Winters noted a distinguished older gentleman in a tweed jacket, military bearing evident in his posture, observing the approaching general with a knowing expression. Former military, Winters assessed automatically. High ranking, based on his bearing. British Army, given his subtle reaction to the palace changing of the guard announcement. The American general was closing the distance now, his expression a mixture of curiosity and faint disdain. Winters mentally prepared for what experience told him was coming. Another test of his discipline. Another attempt to provoke a reaction. Another person who failed to understand that standing guard was not merely standing still. General Thornton dismissed his nervous aide with a curt gesture. "Rejoin the delegation, Lieutenant. Tell them I'm conducting an informal inspection." His voice carried absolute certainty that his deviation from the schedule would be accommodated without question. "Yes, sir," Lieutenant Davis replied, hesitating briefly before adding, "Should I inform the British liaison officer about your inspection?" Thornton's expression hardened slightly. "That won't be necessary, Lieutenant. Last I checked, observing public displays doesn't require diplomatic clearance." The lieutenant retreated hastily, leaving Thornton to approach the guard unaccompanied. The retired British Army colonel among the tourists, Edward Blackwood, immediately recognised the potential for trouble. 30 years in the service had taught him to spot the warning signs of military authority overstepping its boundaries. He moved closer, ostensibly admiring a nearby plaque while keeping the interaction within earshot. "Interesting specimen," Thornton remarked loudly enough for nearby tourists to hear as he circled the guard, theatrical but impressive in its own way. A young American couple exchanged uncomfortable glances, the wife whispering, "Is he allowed to get that close?" Her husband shrugged uncertainly, both stepping back to create distance from what felt increasingly like an impending confrontation. Thornton completed his circuit, positioning himself directly in front of Guard Winters, deliberately occupying the space in his line of sight. "You know, in most militaries, we measure effectiveness by action rather than inaction." Thornton projected his voice, as if addressing a lecture hall rather than a single guard. "Interesting cultural difference." He leaned slightly closer, examining the guard's uniform insignia. "Combat experienced, according to these ribbons. I wonder if standing perfectly still feels like a proper use of that training." Colonel Blackwood's jaw tightened as he observed the deliberate provocation. He caught the eye of a palace security officer and gave a subtle nod toward the situation. The officer acknowledged with an equally discreet nod, speaking quietly into his radio. "I've commanded 3 forward operating bases," Thornton continued, each word precise and measured. "Led combat operations on 4 continents, and never once did I train my men to stand motionless while being addressed by a superior officer." The emphasis he placed on superior left no doubt about his self-assessment. Guard Winters remained perfectly still, his discipline absolute. The only movement was the slight flutter of a ribbon on his uniform as a breeze swept across the palace grounds. "At ease, soldier. Your Brigadier General is addressing you." Thornton's voice carried the unmistakable tone of command, honed through decades of giving orders that were immediately obeyed. He stood directly in the guard's line of sight, deliberately positioning himself to make the guard's forward stare impossible to maintain, without looking through him. "Perhaps they don't teach proper military courtesy in your training," he continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. "In real combat units, acknowledging superior officers isn't optional. It's fundamental to the chain of command." Colonel Blackwood winced slightly at the phrase "real combat units," knowing how deeply insulting that would be to any Queen's Guard if they were permitted to respond. He glanced around, noticing several other visitors with military bearing, a Dutch naval officer and what appeared to be a retired Canadian regiment commander, both watching with growing concern. "You see this uniform?" Thornton continued, his voice carrying across the courtyard. Before I earned the right to wear it, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I've watched brothers in arms fall, defending the values you mock. This isn't a costume, sir. It's a symbol of dedication that you clearly cannot comprehend. Thornton circled the guard once more, his measured steps echoing against the palace stonework. When he returned to face Guard Winters, his posture had shifted subtly, shoulders squared more aggressively, chin raised a fraction higher. In every military on earth, Thornton projected his voice to carry to the gathered crowd, soldiers salute superior officers. It's not merely courtesy, it's recognition of the command structure that keeps armies functional in chaos. He gestured to his insignia. These stars represent authority recognized by NATO and every allied force, including Her Majesty's Armed Forces. Colonel Blackwood stepped closer to a family of American tourists who were watching with uncomfortable fascination. The guards follow a different protocol, he explained quietly. They answer to the Crown first. Their standing orders supersede even visiting generals. Then why doesn't someone tell him that? The American father whispered back. Some lessons need to be learned firsthand, Blackwood replied with the weary wisdom of someone who had witnessed similar scenes before. This is precisely the problem with emphasizing tradition over tactical reality, Thornton continued, his words taking on the sharp edge of a battlefield command. A soldier who cannot adapt to circumstances becomes a liability. In any combat zone I've commanded, this kind of rigid adherence to protocol would get men killed. Several veterans in the crowd exchanged knowing glances. They recognized the dangerous territory this conversation was entering, where military pride collided with diplomatic protocol, rarely with positive results. Thornton moved closer still, his shadow falling across the guard's immaculate uniform. Let me be perfectly clear, soldier. Your ceremonial role does not exempt you from basic military courtesy. When addressed by a superior officer, you acknowledge that officer. That's not British or American protocol, that's military fundamentals. Guard? Thornton's voice snapped across the courtyard like a whip crack. This is a direct order from a Brigadier General. Render proper respect with a salute. Now. Each word landed with the precision of artillery fire, targeted and unyielding. The crowd collectively held its breath. Several people who had been recording the scene on their phones lowered them slowly, suddenly uncomfortable with documenting what felt increasingly like a diplomatic incident. Parents pulled children closer, while military veterans among the spectators straightened unconsciously, responding to the unmistakable tone of command. Something dangerous flickered in Thornton's eyes, a flash of genuine anger breaking through his professional exterior. His right hand rose deliberately, hovering for a moment before settling firmly on the guard's shoulder. When a superior officer gives a direct order, Thornton said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, the only acceptable response is immediate compliance. The physical contact sent a ripple of shock through the observers. Colonel Blackwood took a definitive step forward, his military bearing suddenly prominent. General, I must advise you. But before he could finish, Thornton continued, his fingers pressing into the scarlet uniform. I understand theatrical tradition, soldier. What I don't understand is blatant disrespect to a NATO commanding officer. His voice carried absolute authority, the same tone that had directed troops through combat zones and commanded immediate obedience in crisis situations. A young boy's voice broke the tense silence. Mum, he's not supposed to touch the guard, is he? The question hung in the air, innocent yet perfectly articulating the boundary that had been crossed. The shift in Guard Winter's demeanour came with such precise military discipline that several observers later described it as almost mechanical in its perfection. One moment, he stood in ceremonial stillness. The next, his white-gloved hand moved with fluid efficiency to remove the general's grip from his shoulder. The movement was neither aggressive nor disrespectful, simply definitive. His action carried the practiced precision of thousands of hours of drill, combined with the quiet authority of someone operating under absolute certainty of protocol. "Sir, with respect, touching a Queen's Guard is forbidden under standing orders." Winter's voice carried the clipped precision of British military authority, steady and unapologetic. "My duty requires me to inform you of this violation and request you step back to the designated viewing area." The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible in the sudden silence. General Thornton's expression shifted from commanding to momentarily stunned, then rapidly progressed to indignation. "You dare!" he began, but Winters continued with impeccable military courtesy that nevertheless permitted no interruption. "Brigadier General Thornton, while your rank commands appropriate respect within NATO allied forces, current protocol on palace grounds establishes clear guidelines for interaction with the Queen's Guard." His gaze remained forward, still following ceremonial requirements even as he addressed the situation. "Physical contact with a guard on duty constitutes a Class 2 security breach, requiring immediate response." Thornton's face flushed, but before he could reply, Winters continued with mechanical precision. "Standing Order 157 specifically addresses interaction with Allied military personnel. Guards will maintain position and bearing regardless of visiting military rank, as their oath is sworn first to the Crown." Colonel Blackwood had moved to within a few paces, his military bearing evident as he addressed Thornton. "He's entirely correct, General. The Guards operate under the direct authority of the monarchy, not NATO command structure. Their protocols supersede standard military courtesy within the palace grounds." "My duty is to the Crown first," Winters continued, his discipline evident in every perfectly chosen word. "That duty includes maintaining prescribed position, bearing and protocol, regardless of external military authority. This isn't a matter of disrespect to your rank, sir, but rather absolute respect for the oath we've sworn." "General Thornton." The voice came from behind, measured and authoritative, without being confrontational. Captain James Edwards of the Queen's Guard approached with the measured stride of someone comfortable with both ceremonial precision and battlefield command. His uniform was identical to Winter's, though the subtle differences in insignia marked his rank. "I believe there might be some misunderstanding regarding protocol." Thornton turned, military instinct, causing him to assess the approaching officer. Captain Edwards's bearing was impeccable, neither deferential nor challenging, but rather presenting the perfect balance of professional courtesy. His approach deftly diffused the tension while maintaining the dignity of all involved. "Captain Edwards, Guard Company Commander," he introduced himself with a crisp nod that acknowledged Thornton's rank without compromising his own authority. "I understand you've been discussing protocol with Guard Winters." "Your guard broke position to address me," Thornton stated, his tone suggesting this validated his earlier points about ceremonial rigidity versus practical response. "Indeed, sir," Captain Edwards replied smoothly. "Guard Winters followed Standing Order 157, paragraph 3. In the event of physical contact or immediate security concerns, guards are authorized to respond with minimum necessary communication and action." His delivery was factual rather than defensive. "Rather impressive adherence to protocol, actually." Captain Edwards gestured toward a less crowded area of the grounds. "Perhaps we might continue this discussion more privately, General. I'd be happy to explain the historical and practical considerations that govern our protocols here." As they moved away from the crowd, Captain Edwards began speaking in the measured tones of someone well versed in explaining complex traditions to visitors. "The Queen's Guard appears ceremonial to most observers, but that's only one aspect of their function," he explained. "Each guard is drawn from active combat units, the same soldiers who served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other deployments. Winters himself was with Special Reconnaissance in Eastern Europe just last month." Something in Thornton's expression shifted as this information registered. "Combat veterans," he acknowledged, reassessing his earlier assumptions. Indeed, Captain Edwards confirmed. The ceremonial aspect is additional duty, not their primary function. Their standing orders reflect this dual role, maintaining traditions that connect our military present to its historical foundations while remaining combat-ready soldiers. They paused near a more private section of the palace grounds. Captain Edwards's next words were carefully chosen. "When you addressed Guard Winters, sir, you weren't facing ceremonial pageantry, but rather a different command structure. His non-response wasn't disrespect, but adherence to standing orders that place sovereign authority above visiting military rank." Thornton's military discipline reasserted itself as he absorbed Captain Edwards's explanation. Years of command experience had taught him the value of adapting to new information, even when it challenged existing assumptions. "I appreciate the clarification, Captain," he said, his tone shifting from confrontational to professionally engaged. "In 30 years of service, I've encountered many different military traditions, though none quite so particular in their protocol." Colonel Blackwood approached, offering his hand to General Thornton. "Edward Blackwood, formerly Colonel, 5th Royal Regiment. I served alongside American forces in the Gulf." The introduction subtly emphasized shared military experience rather than the recent tension. Thornton accepted the handshake with professional courtesy. "If I might add, General," Blackwood said, his tone conversational but carrying the weight of experience, "what you witnessed with Guard Winters was precisely the discipline that makes these soldiers exceptional in combat situations. The same focus that keeps them motionless for hours enables them to maintain position under enemy fire when necessary." Thornton considered this perspective, his tactical mind engaging with the concept. "Different application of the same discipline," he acknowledged. "Exactly so," Captain Edwards confirmed. "Many of our guards have transferred those same skills to special operations, where patience and absolute control are essential. The ceremonial duties appear anachronistic to some, but they build fundamental combat disciplines that serve modern warfare quite effectively." A small group of schoolchildren passed by, pointing excitedly at Guard Winter's perfect stillness. Their teacher explained in hushed tones about the tradition and what it represented. "Tradition has its place," Thornton conceded, watching the children's fascination, "though I've always prioritized adaptability in my command philosophy." "As do we," Captain Edwards replied smoothly. "But adaptability itself takes different forms. For us, it includes maintaining historic continuity while deploying the same personnel to modern conflict zones, often transitioning between those roles within the same month." Thornton nodded thoughtfully. Different expressions of the same military principles. As they walked toward the ceremony location, Thornton glanced back at Guard Winters, seeing him now through a more informed perspective. "Your guard handled the situation with admirable restraint," he admitted. "Many would have responded more aggressively to my approach." "They're selected as much for their judgment as their discipline," Captain Edwards explained. "Each guard makes dozens of instant decisions daily, which protocol violations require response, which can be handled with minimal intervention, and which demand immediate action." "Combat decision-making applied to ceremonial context," Thornton observed, professional respect gradually replacing his earlier dismissiveness. As they waited for the ceremony to begin, Thornton's military mind continued processing the lessons of the encounter. Different traditions, he reflected, different expressions of the same core principles: discipline, duty, chain of command. "Well put, General," Blackwood agreed. "The uniforms and protocols may differ, but the underlying military values remain consistent across nations and traditions." The first notes of the ceremonial music began, signalling the approaching guard change. Thornton stood at parade rest, his posture unconsciously reflecting a newfound respect for a military tradition different from, yet fundamentally aligned with, his own. What does true respect between different military traditions look like? Today's story shows how understanding often matters more than authority when different service cultures meet. If you found this story meaningful, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more tales that explore the deeper meaning behind the Royal Guard's unwavering discipline. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll know immediately when we post our next story. Share this video with someone who appreciates the values of duty, protocol, and mutual respect between different military traditions. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed someone confuse position with respect? And what traditions do you think deserve more understanding from those unfamiliar with their significance? Check out our other videos appearing on your screen right now, and we'll be back tomorrow with another new story reminding you what true service means.